there's a lot happening right now. And there's different explanations on why different things are happening from a military perspective. On one side, you've got the volume of attacks by the Iranian side have dropped significantly, 95% in the last couple of days. On the other hand, the strategic goals of Iran are being achieved. They're still striking the Gulf. The Strait of Hormuz is still closed, and the regime hasn't fallen. So I'd love for me, it looks like a military loss for Iran, but strategically they're ahead. I'd love to get your analysis of it.
Well, first of all, I'm not going to call it a regime. Regime is what used as a derogatory term for a government that you don't happen to like and you want to get rid of. Because if they're a regime, then most of Europe is a regime that has extremely unpopular presidents or prime ministers, and the U.S. is heading in the same direction. As far as, first of all, who do we have for the numbers of how many drones and rockets are being fired? We have to trust the Pentagon. The same people, by the way, till a day and a half ago said we didn't hit that school and we didn't kill those kids, or maybe we did. The same people that lied just as much as anybody else, because when the first sacrifice of any war is truth. That's the first victim that goes out the window. Nobody's going to tell you
by
the
both
truth.
Sides. Would you agree? By both sides, yeah.
Absolutely. Nobody's going to tell you their actual losses. Nobody's going to admit to anything that went wrong. I mean, it's much harder to hide these days than it was, say, 1990, 1980, or before that. With the pictures are getting out of Jerusalem, and you have to remember, as the prime democracy of the Middle East, if you want to call it that, Israel always has censorship on at full blast. Right now, it's at overdrive. They don't want anything getting out, but it does get out. It gets out by Israelis, it gets out by Palestinians that are there, and by foreigners. The Haifa oil refinery's been hit. Electric plants have been hit. Israel's taking a pounding. So I'm not quite sure about the 2 or 3 flights, or rather 2 or 3 rockets in a flight concept. Now, on the other hand, Iran is not going into a mini blitz that it did in the 12th Day War. And it could have done a lot more in the 12th Day War than it did. But Iran is going for a long haul. You're not going to overthrow the Iranian government. For several reasons. First of all, it's a theocracy. Theocracies are based on faith, and it's already a much more stable government form, especially under pressure. Second of all, air campaigns have never overthrown any government ever. The Americans and the British burned to death 5 million Germans in World War II. Out of 6 million German civilians, 5 million were murdered. Everybody remembers Dresden. Every single German city was burnt. Did the Germans turn and surrender their government? No, they stood and fought. Because no matter what you think of the government that's over you, it's not killing your women and your children. It's not killing your family. It's the guys dropping the bombs or the missiles that are killing your family. And you may not like the power that be, but that's the only thing that's protecting your family right now. And people will always rally around the flag. It's human nature. I'm not even talking about when you have Shia culture, which idealizes martyrdom, which, by the way, is not that far away from Orthodox culture. For when the Russian soldiers go for Christ and for the motherland, and they go into battle, it's basically a lot in common with Orthodoxy, Christian Orthodoxy, when it comes to that point. These people aren't going to go away. They're not going to break up. They're not going to die off. They're a 3,000-year-old civilization. Splitting them with Azerbaijan is not going to work because, by the way, the Azerbaijanis are co-rulers in Iran. The Khamenei is an Azerbaijani. One of the previous presidents was an Azerbaijani. So splitting them along cultural lines is an extremely difficult case because the 2 main cultural groups are unified. You can do a lot of things to kill a lot of people, which the U.S. is doing right now very well in Israel, but it's not going to destroy the government. And the problem for the U.S. is it's running out of munitions. What's come out is that in the first 6 days, the U.S. used 3,600 missiles, both defensive missiles for the Patriots, the SA-4s, the THAAD missiles, which is a project that should have never been built, and lingered around for 20 years until it finally was given birth, and offensive missiles, air-to-ground missiles, Tomahawks, and so on. At this rate, the U.S. can't replace even a fraction of that in any kind of meaningful time. It just physically can't. It doesn't have the facilities, doesn't have the manufacturing base, and those missiles are put together by hand in very small numbers at a very high price. That's because they make a lot of money for the manufacturers. So for Iran, the point is we can last this out, and we're not going to race ahead in massive amounts of missiles, which, by the way, Iran is still manufacturing. It has missiles, what they call missile cities underground. They have huge facilities underground where they store them. They can move them around on launch vehicles, come out from different entrances, shoot them off, and go back underground. So it's very hard to find. And then on top of that, we see videos where, I mean, my hat's off. I didn't even know you could do something like that. But decoys that are just painted on the ground. We've seen a lot of hits on decoyed airplanes, helicopters, things like that. And you know it's a decoy because when the round hits, it's just a small crater in the middle of this plane. It doesn't fly apart as a vehicle would. It's just a burning small crater in the middle of this drawing. So how many missiles were used on that? We don't know. But the reason the U.S. Air Force is now hitting, and the Israelis too, hitting civilians is because they can't find the targets that they want to hit. They did the same thing in Mosul when they were trying to free Mosul from IGIL. They just wiped the city off the face of the earth. The same thing in Yugoslavia when the Yugoslav army in 99 just melted away into the mountains. They were sitting there waiting for NATO and the Americans to come in to butcher them in the mountains. They started going after civilians. And this is nothing new. Like I said, no air campaign has ever won a war. You want to win a war, you put boots on the ground. You put boots on the ground in Iran, you're going to face massive casualties, and you're going to possibly face a massive revolt, if not a revolution in the U.S., because the U.S. is not going to take those types of casualties. The people won't. The government may be willing to do it, but the people won't. And the U.S. military doesn't have the capacity to do that, not in its present state. As far as the Straits of Hormuz, you don't need big, expensive drones. Yeah. Because Ukraine, via Greece, proved a concept there. They attacked a Russian tanker about a month and a half ago, swarmed it, or maybe it was 2 months ago, swarmed it with FPV drones with a big battery on them. So it was passing, I think, 8 or 9 kilometers away from the islands, the Aegean Islands. Swarmed it with RPG rounds strapped underneath it. The same thing that gets used on the front lines. Iran can very easily put 1,000 guys out sitting in the mountains under trees with drones and VR goggles and just start launching drones into the Straits of Hormuz and watch any shipping stop. And if the U.S. Navy comes in there, there's going to be fewer than the U.S. Navy ships left because anybody going in there's no room for maneuver. It's very narrow, at the narrowest point, it's about 32 kilometers. I mean, you could quite literally cover it with direct fire artillery, or indirect fire artillery, let me phrase that. 155, 152 millimeters will cover that range. And you can have guys just swarming it with drones all day, all night. What are you going to do? You can't blow up every single tree that somebody might be sitting under in those mountains. Pretty hard to invade those mountains. They're Himalaya-sized mountains, ranges upon ranges upon ranges. So to close those with modern technology is not a big deal.
There's a lot that I agree with, to be honest. First, the only thing I disagree with is the regime. I'm just a lot more critical of the regime. I'm not sure how critical you are of what they did in January, but I'm obviously happy to call it a government because one person's regime is another person's government. But from a military perspective, I've spoken to a lot of analysts, and they've all made very similar points. And I'm not sure how many. As you said, we don't really know the exact figures. There's a lot of talk about radars, American radars that were destroyed as well. I know you've talked about that before. I'll let you comment on that. Yes. But it's hard to verify those. It's hard to verify how many launches Iran has. We do know, though, however, that there is a new, you can call it a weapon that the U.S. has used. They're calling it a sensor shooter network. Not sure if you've seen that. But essentially, satellites spot a missile launcher as soon as it comes out from the heat signal and beams the coordinates to the nearest F-35 that essentially shoots it relatively quickly, sometimes before even launching the missile. So it's like Call of Duty in real life. And that made it a lot harder for Iran to launch missiles and a lot easier for Israel and the US to strike the launchers. But I do think that this is not enough to win the war. I think all that Iran needs to do to win the war depends on the war's objective, which we'll get to in a bit, is to close the Strait of Hormuz for as long as possible, but also disrupt the Gulf nations, but mainly close the Strait of Hormuz. I see anything else that Iran does, especially when it comes to striking Israel, as more of a bonus, for lack of a better term. Because closing the Strait of Hormuz will just hurt the economy, the global economy, enough to force Trump to seek an exit, an off-ramp from the war. Now, you're saying that it's very easy to do that with very cheap drones, and you're pretty accurate, because we saw Ukraine do that very successfully. And that's not talking about the ability to mine the Strait of Hormuz or use the sea drones as well, which I don't think they've used yet. And there was a lot of talks about these sea drones prior to this. But it goes back to the point, is it all depends on what Trump's objective is. What do you think Trump's objective is? Is it a regime change? Is it a more friendly regime like in Venezuela, so Iran is away from Russia and China? Because that matters a lot in what we determine as successful or not.
Well, friendly regime, you mean regime change. Trump's objectives seem to change with the hour because they don't know what their objectives are. Look, the reality of this is very simple. The U.S. has no objectives, because we've heard directly from Marco Rubio and from Johnson, who's the Speaker of the House, a Republican Speaker of the House, in a big word salad that, if you boil down to just what they said, was we weren't planning on doing this, but Israel decided to go, and we had no choice but follow Israel. So the translation, the U.S. is not in the driving seat. And the Israeli mission is to destroy absolutely every military, industrial, and political power that is not subservient to Israel in the greater Israeli space. And the greater Israeli space, as has been explained by Smolich, who's the Minister of Finance, as seen by the patches worn by a lot of Israeli soldiers, is the river to the river, the Euphrates to the Nile. Everything is theirs. As according 3,000 years ago, Abraham's prodigy was promised that. Funny thing is Abraham's prodigy is also Palestinians, and several other Arabs claim the same prodigy, but I'm not going to go into theology. But the point is they're claiming all of that. And already they're talking about Turkey is our next target. They can't finish Iran. They can't finish Lebanon, where they're stuck in a ground war. But they're already planning on Turkey. And believe you me, Erdogan is listening, and he's hearing this. And if the Egyptians are not totally insane, they're knowing that they're going to be after Turkey if anything happens. But Turkey would be a really interesting case because it's a NATO country. But why not? I mean, we've already seen Ukraine attack 3 NATO countries and get away with it when it blew up refineries in Hungary, Slovakia, and Romania, and has threatened to murder the president of Hungary. Okay, I guess that goes. That's
they just threatened, I think, threatened to share his phone number, I think, not threatened to murder
He
him.
threatened to share his address with the Ukrainian military so they could go have a talk with him. That's a direct threat on a man's life.
I thought it was sharing they were sharing his phone number so people can call him and complain to him.
His contacts, so they could have a talk with him. It's a mafia thug threat. That's how they talk. And Zelensky apparently spent a little too much time with the mob in his youth. But that's how it's talked, and this is how it's been accepted by both Slovakia and by Hungary. But that's a different issue altogether.
Yeah. I'll get back to
Israel. Israel is, I don't think, a bonus. Israel is one of the main objectives, because the Israeli government has been after Iran. I mean, they've been beating the war drum of Iran is going to have a nuclear missile since, well, the earliest article I could find was in the Jerusalem Post from 1986. So 40 years. Any day now. If Iran wanted to have a nuclear weapon, they would have had one on the moon by now. I mean, realistically speaking, 40 years they've been saying, beating the same drum nonstop. In fact, Netanyahu was beating that drum to get America into Iraq. And that's a disaster. They killed a lot of over 1 million Iraqis, about 5,000 Americans, left about 50,000 Americans missing body parts, invalids, and cost the U.S. $7 trillion. But hey, they got rid of another enemy for Israel. That's all that counts. It doesn't count for America. It doesn't count for anything for the U.S. So at this point, Iran, yes, of course, Iran can outlast, but the damage that they have done to the U.S. facilities is going to take years, if maybe possibly even a decade, to fix, if it ever gets fixed. Because the biggest damage they've done is show these Arab princedoms that you can't count on the U.S. to protect you. They were always told you're part of the club, we'll protect you. Well, there is no protection. In fact, the U.S. is now stripping its Asian allies of air defense systems
South
to ship
Korea.
to Israel. South Korea, Japan, all of that's coming out of there. That's leaving them empty after they've done everything for the U.S. to piss off
Allegedly,
China.
that hasn't been confirmed by CENTCOM yet, so
Well,
it's just allegedly for now.
it hasn't been, but the president's already said that they're going to be taking them out of there. So if Trump said it, more than likely CENTCOM's going to do it. Well, it's not CENTCOM; it's actually it'll be Pacific Command that strips them out. I guess they could ship them by. More likely, they have to ship them by ship. Maybe they can. Well, even by air, they wouldn't be able to do it because they'd have to cross China or Russia. It'd be a very long flight. But either way, it's not enough to save the situation. Simply put, the U.S. came in with about 192 THAAD missile interceptors in Israel. There's about 70 more THAAD missile interceptors spread out with other U.S. units. The Arabs used up their THAAD interceptors, so they had about 100 of them. And there's about 1,000 Patriots. In fact, some of the remains from Patriots, people were taking photographs, were PAC-2 Patriots. They were year 2000, second-generation Patriots. If that's the case, then the U.S. is really running out fast. The U.S. is manufacturing Patriots. Simply put, U.S. is manufacturing Patriots between 35 to 40 units a month. THAADs are being manufactured about 10 interceptors a month. They're all done by hand. That's how you maximize the price of them and you maximize the profit margin. Is you build them by hand. There's no manufacturing facility that can slap them out on an automated process. So, like it or not, the U.S. is running on missiles. Look, if you look at phase one of this for the Iranians was destroying the U.S. Capacity to see what's coming, blinding the U.S., taking out those radar systems. And if you look at it was actually a pretty big shock. I mean, I spent 11 years in the U.S. military. But it was a pretty big shock, even how they took out the radar system in Qatar, because they used an old Shahed drone. It has that little internal combustion motor on it that sounds like a moped, and you're watching it, and it's just flying up. It's relatively slow. It goes up and smacks straight down on that radar array. Nobody's firing. No Stingers are going up as point defense systems. No machine gun fire. No assault rifle fire. Nobody's firing. It has free sky over a U.S. base. So that already tells you you've got big problems. I mean, I guarantee if there was a Russian base and something was going that slow, everybody would be firing to try to take it down. Why are there no Marines? Why are there no naval personnel on there or Air Force? I guess it would be Air Force personnel trying to defend the radar system. I don't know, but there was none. And this was day one. Now, that radar system has been said it's going to take between 12 to 24 months to repair it, $500 million. The big radar station that was taken out in Bahrain, they're talking between 7 to 9 years. And that's because the U.S. doesn't have access to rare earth magnets. Yeah, U.S. has a huge amount of rare earth raw material. It's not that rare. It's actually spread out all over most of the world. There's only 2 of the 17 elements that are actually really, really rare. But they don't have the processing capacity. China's got 97% of processing capacity. Russia's got 1.5%, and the rest of the world has less than 2%. And Russia's doubling its volume over the next 2 years. That's the plan to at least meet its own internal demands. But the point is like it or not, you're probably going to China, and China's already cut off the U.S. for dual use. And the U.S. has tried to go through Sony. They've tried to go through various other corporations, international corporations said no, because if we triple our amount that we're ordering, the Chinese are going to say, well, show us the electronics you're building with it. No, you can't. You're cut off. And that's the end of their business. So there's a big problem. By the way, manufacturing those missiles is a big problem because, again, you come back to high-end magnets. All of those 17 rare earth minerals are all magnetic. So in their pure form, they're highly magnetic. That's what they're used. And if the U.S. doesn't have that, well, that's your supply chain being cut off. Whose fault is that? That's the fault of America, of course, for not building its own facilities.
On that last point, I think this is where I lean more to the first point you made is about how this is the U.S. following Israel. Now, obviously, politicians make a lot of statements. Some of them don't make sense. Trump walked back Rubio's statements. I don't think this is the U.S. following Israel. I think this is the U.S. doing this for their own strategic interest. Now, there's a divergence here. What Israel wants, which they don't mind, a collapsed Iranian regime, a collapsed state of Iran, similar to what we saw in Syria. Strategically, that benefits Israel. But I think Trump is a lot more calculated in this, because in his goal, as I said earlier, is the Strait of Hormuz. Well, China has control of the refining of the rare earths. Well, what can the US do in return to be able to counter that threat and be able to deter China from unifying with Taiwan? And that is controlling the energy. And one way to do that is, Panama Canal, kick out China. More importantly, Venezuela, trying to have better presence in Greenland. We'll see how that turns out. And obviously, the most important is the Strait of Hormuz, which Iran has the ability to shut off. And we'll see if that continues. So I do see that Trump's goal in this is purely a more friendly regime. Now, is that feasible? That's a different discussion. The regime it's a theology. So will they, after being bombed so extensively for 9 days, you've given a very good example that a regime change through through just pure bombing like we saw in World War II and since then has never worked. It's not like worked once or twice. As you've said, it has never worked as a strategy. But if the goal is not really regime change, if the goal is what Trump said 2 days ago, working with another religious leader, which he said he works really well with, a Delcy Rodriguez 2.0, not a regime change, that might work. But then the question is, how far will Israel go? When will Israel stop this war? I would love you to comment on this, but also, more importantly, you've talked about how hard the US has been hit. But we can't also dismiss how hard Iran's been hit. So how could Iran sustain this if it's true that their launches are getting hit very quickly? Is it purely through drones? How hard is it to create new drone factories and keep producing those drones?
Well, first of all, those drones are underground. Let's begin with that. The drone factories are underground. You're mostly looking at plastic polymer materials. They're easy to make underground. You can put them together. This is not a tube that you have to forge, or rather, you take sheet steel and then you have to heat it. Well, I guess there's rolling processes. There are cold steel rolling process too to make the tube for a missile. This is much easier. This is much easier to manufacture. And Iran has been getting ready for this for 20 years. Definitely the last 12 years. Second of all, there are no... Okay, first of all, let's begin with this. The problem with the Latins is Latin culture. And I'm going all the way back to the Romans, where every single general wanted to be emperor. It's the same thing right now. The problem, the curse of Latin America is it cannot unify because every single general wants to be the big boss. As my friend Larry Johnson told me, he had spoken to no names mentioned, a person active is still in the CIA, and they bought a general in Venezuela who switched off the anti-aircraft system. Basically, told him to stand down. And one of those Chinooks got hit because somebody still fired on it. A Chinook, if you've never been around Chinook, is huge. It's loud. It's slow. You cannot miss the damn thing. The reason they brought in Chinooks is because they use sound weapons, concentrated sound weapons, which have been used by the police they were used on ships for direct communications. So line of sight communications, because you can't interfere with that. It's not a radio signal. But they've been used by the police in various countries. We saw that in Belgrade last year. There's a lawsuit in New York where the police used it against protesters and they popped their eardrums, caused cardio damage, permanent damage, because it's sound waves, concentrated sound waves. But that needs a large power source, and it's big and it's heavy, so that's what the Chinooks are for. But that's an exception. You're dealing, first of all, just to understand, they killed the man that for 40 years has not allowed Iran to have a nuclear weapon. Let's just begin with that. Yeah, two fatwas. The two fatwas are probably going to get walked around. I mean, if you don't want Iran to have nuclear weapons, this is about the stupidest move you could physically make, unless you're psychopathic hatred of anything Iranian, say the Israelis, and you just want to kill them for just the reason that he exists. Because if there's any political logic, you've just done the stupidest thing possible that you can actually do. And they did. They won, and he knew he was going to be a martyr. And he was willing to be martyred. And that's why he didn't go to a bunker. He stayed in his house. To put himself under the exact same risk as everybody else. This guy is going to go down as one of the top martyrs in the Shia faith. And this is equivalent to the U.S. murdering Patriarch Kirill in Moscow, if they tried to do that. You would have about as much of a reaction, especially from the Orthodox Christians, particularly the Russian Orthodox, which are half the Orthodox Christians in the world, as you're having with the Shia. It would be just, if there's no other button to push to piss people off. Now, having said that, 2 points here. First of all, Mari, do you have any children?
Not yet, no.
Well, as a father, I'll tell you this. If somebody kills one of my kids, I'm going to take a rifle and I'm going to murder them as long as I can until I die. 165 fathers just from that school alone. The U.S. killed 2 days ago. The body count from Iran in Tehran was over 1,000 people. I got a friend of mine. He's the director of a news outlet here for Lebanon, out of Beirut. I was nice old man. I'm not going to say his name. I was just talking to him yesterday. He's lost 5 family members from the Israelis bombing Beirut over the last 2 days. Do you think that those people are going to put their guns down? No, they're going to go for revenge. That's human nature. You've killed my family. I'm going to go kill you. That is human nature. Absolute human nature. And Americans would do the exact same thing if the same thing was happening to Americans. I guarantee you that. So already those people are, murdering their women and children is not the way to get them to calm down and let's have a new regime. The other problem is the people that Trump has killed were the older generation, the ones that actually he could have talked to. The people that come into power right now, again, this is something that having served in the U.S. military, I can tell you most people don't understand anything about anybody outside the U.S. They all look at them, they're all Arabs. They're not Arabs. They're Persians. They're a 3,000-year civilization. They have loyalty down, beaten hard into them. And the people that are now coming to power are the 50-something-year-olds. And just why that is important, because the 50-something-year-olds were the ones that fought in the Iran-Iraq war, that the U.S. backed Iraq, gave Iraq chemical weapons, killed almost 1 million Iranians with chemical weapons. Those people are not going to step back. Those are veterans from the trench warfare. Those are veterans who spent their youth watching their friends die from the Iraqis who were being armed to the teeth by the Americans. Those people have a lot of bones to pick. And those are the people that just came to power, thanks to the Americans, and the Israelis doing the exact same stupid thing that they could have done. The worst people that they could have, generation they could have brought into power for their ends, they just brought into power. So I don't know what Trump is being told. Tulsi Gabbard, who told him flat out Iran wasn't building a nuclear weapon or anything of the sort, she's been apparently slapped back into being a wallflower because she's just disappeared. Nobody's seen or heard anything from her in months. So we're looking at what? We're looking at the worst possible negotiators. Additionally, who wants to negotiate with America? Let's be honest. And the U.S. and Israel murders the people they negotiate with. And this is nothing new, by the way. Milosevic in 94, the U.S. hit his estate, killed some of his family while negotiating with the Yugoslavs. This is not new. This is more like SOP, standard operating procedure, unfortunately to say. And Trump has done this twice. Twice? Who's going to trust him a third time? Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. There's going to be a third time. The people that brought in have no trust for the U.S. They fought against a U.S. Proxy in their youth. This is going to be a hard fight. These people are in for the long haul.
I want to ask you another question, though. You said who wants to negotiate with the U.S.? A very fair question, but also who wants to be an enemy of the U.S. right now? So you've got Venezuela. The U.S. came in, removed Maduro, has someone more friendly with them. Russia, China did almost nothing. In Iran, not the same thing, very different thing, but there's a war with Iran right now. There's talks about Russia sharing intelligence with the Iranians. The foreign minister did not confirm or deny that, but nothing beyond that. 2 questions there. First,
really? Nothing beyond that? Russia brought in MiG-29s. Russia brought in Su-35s. Russia brought in S-400s. Russia has upgraded the propulsion system, the avionics, the jamming system. Russia brought in equipment to jam the Starlinks. And if you know anything about how long it takes to train a pilot, I'm not saying anything, but more likely those aren't Iranian pilots. And there's a whole constellation of satellites flying overhead that are both Russian and Chinese. Believe you me, proxy can be played both ways. The U.S. has murdered Russian civilians for 4 years. Those HIMARS are American soldiers sitting there, whether they're sheep-dipped mercenaries or not, firing. Those are my family members are getting fired upon. I'm from Lugansk. I have family all up and down that area. They've been getting shelled for 12 years by the Ukrainians. So this is very, very personal for me. I go down there quite often enough. I see the damage that they do. Those HIMARS that are being targeted into Russian cities, into Russian territory, into Russian civilian territory, are targeted by American generals. In fact, the New York Times back in December of 24 confirmed everything I was saying before that in the Russian media, that it was American generals. American generals were demanded they attack them. The American generals plot everything. It's from end to end the U.S. military shooting into Russia. They're already at war at Russia. Neither side wants to admit it, but that's how it is. If you think that the Russian military isn't going to proxy back, and what is the U.S. going to do? Start a nuclear war? Let's go. That's the basic concept. If the U.S. is not going to give up, destroy America for this. Neither will the U.S. ever, in any kind of nightmare scenario, surrender New York for London or for Paris or for Warsaw, or definitely not for any other countries' cities. It's not going to happen. Let's just begin with that.
But that was, Stanislav, that was my next question to you. Do you think Russia would turn Iran for the U.S., what the U.S. did with Ukraine for Russia, just to weaken the U.S. as much as possible? And how about China as well? Could they do this as well? Because it doesn't look like it. I understand they've helped with the satellites, they've helped with the jamming, they've helped with military equipment, the MiGs, the SUs, but that's still not that significant. Right now, they're only helping diplomatically. There isn't any indicators they're sending weaponry to the region right now. There hasn't been any military involvement in any way. Hopefully, there won't be. No one wants to see Russia and the US clash directly, but there isn't the same amount of support for Iran as there is for Ukraine with NATO and the US. Could that change?
First of all, in 6 months they flooded Iran with a lot of equipment, and Baidu radar system is working in Iran, which is directly connected up to the satellites that China has. Both sides are very, very active. They have no interest. Let me just put it this way. Iran is an existential crisis for both China and Russia. Just a little bit less for Russia than Ukraine is. Iran falls, that means the Caucasus falls, Central Asia falls, and everything gets shipped into southern Russia. Russia will not allow Iran to fall. Russian ships are still coming in. Their Russian planes are still coming in. Russia has Iran's back, and Iran knows it. Officially, maybe not any sayings officially, but Russia is not going to allow Iran to fall under no circumstances. Russia has been and will continue supplying Iran with fuel, with wheat, and anything else it needs. And the Iranian people can hold out. I mean, look, boots on the ground, okay.
Do you think that will happen? Do you genuinely think that will happen, though?
If it happens, well, I mean, the 82nd Airborne, apparently everybody's being called back, so it could happen. It's going to be the death of the 82nd Airborne. I mean, this isn't Iraq. Look, just to understand Iraq, because again, those are Arabs and these are Persians. The U.S. military, well, first of all, Saddam was a fool because twice he allowed the U.S. military and its allies to build up on his borders and invade him instead of striking first. In 2003, the CIA was all over the place buying out Iraqi generals, and they did. About half the Iraqi army never left its barracks to start combat operations. They just sat by and waited. And even with all that, it took the U.S. military 22 days to reach Baghdad. 22 days. The Iraqis are fighting right now. The U.S., there's about 2,000 U.S. troops surrounded in 3 bases. They're being attacked. Mosul, there's videos coming out of constant combat. Sooner or later, they're going to run out of ammunition and food and water. Then what do? You got 2,000 soldiers that are trapped. The U.S. isn't exactly doing a lot to get them out for some reason. The only way you're going to get them out is by convoy punching in there and trying to pull them out. But here's the point. A, where are you going to build up? 2, if you're going west to east, you're going to fight your way through Iraq before you get even up to Iran. If you're going to go through Azerbaijan, the lines of communication are huge. They're all the way going from Turkey all the way through a very narrow road between Iran and Armenia. Well, it really is Armenia, but Armenia gave it up. The Trump's road or whatever. Now up to Azerbaijan. That again, the logistics insane, and it's apt to be attacked by drones, by missiles. So either way, it's already a problem. If you throw them to try to defend the Strait of Hormuz, try to take the territory in the south. Yeah, there was a village called Krinky not too long ago. The Ukrainians buried 2 battalions of Marines in that little village, 3 roads parallel. on the bank of the Dnieper River across from Kherson, a little bit north and across from Kherson. And the Russian military just shelled them for 4 months. They just kept shipping more people in to die. 2 battalions were destroyed. That's going to be the same thing. I mean, these guys are going to be with a seat to their back, stuck on a coastal strip and constantly under fire. There is no good way for the U.S. to go in. And if the U.S. actually wants to do a military invasion, look, if you pull the entire U.S. Army, Marine Corps together, you got about 550,000 troops. Never mind, the U.S. doesn't have 6 months to put them together. Iraq won in 1991. Desert Storm was 6 months to put all those troops together, plus all the allies. And the U.S. was still in a Cold War, so it still had a military that was quite much larger than it is right now. And its European allies had real militaries back then. So they were able to pull that in. Even Syria was on the side of the U.S. at that point. In 2003, it was already a shadow.
What is more limited? What is more limited? Like Trump's been talks, or there's been reports that Trump's looking at the Karg Island, which is in the southwest of Iran, which is like a choke point that's responsible for about 90% of Iranian exports. So for such a small island, militarily, is it just as hard to be able to invade that?
Well, no, I mean, you could take the island. Let's remember Snake Island while we were at it, the beginning of the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. The garrison on Snake Island surrendered, and then they were given back in exchange a couple months later. So there was nothing that they fought to the end. They surrendered. So the Russian garrison that was on there, the Ukrainians tried to invade that island constantly. They were beaten off until they got artillery up to the edge, 155 millimeter, and they could reach the island. Russia got off the island. The Ukrainians landed troops back on the island, and Russian military exterminated that island. The island's empty. So yeah, you can get on that island. You can put a flag on that island. Can you hold that island? First of all, it's an island, so you have to constantly replenish it. Second of all, it's within artillery range from either side. So that is if the UAE actually participates from either side. That island is within easy artillery range. That island is within easy drone range. Anybody gets on that island is going to be hunted day and night by drones. They're going to have artillery strikes. They're going to have missile strikes coming in on them. Not really worth it. I mean, if you want to have a lot of heroes that die pointlessly, you could actually drop them off there. It'd be the Marines more than likely taking that island. But what's it going to get you? You're not going to build anything on there. You're not going to be able to deploy anything on there because it's just going to be a firing range. That's not a solution.
I'll ask you a final question, Stanislav. Just trying to look at this objectively and putting yourself in Trump's shoes. Do you think he will try to get an off-ramp as soon as possible? He cannot afford for the Straits to be closed for another 3 weeks. Obviously, you believe that Iranians' capabilities are a lot more than what the West would like to think. Considering that, the only logical path, at least in my eyes, is for Trump to try to end the war as soon as possible, and boots on the ground should be completely off the table politically, just looking at it politically for him. What will be your analysis of Trump's next move and where the war will be in a few weeks?
Politico had an article out last week as all this was starting up. They said basically U.S. is looking for, is gearing up for a 100-day war, and they don't know how to stop this. And they're going to be out of missiles. Defensive missiles are running out now. Offensive missiles are going to be out within the next week and a half. What do you do after that? I mean, they're dropping gravity bomb. Well, they're dropping JDAMs, which is basically just a gravity bomb with a glide unit and a control unit in there to bring in the target. But those aren't that effective. As effective, obviously, as Tomahawks or anything of that sort. What do you do? Well, here's the problem. What do you do? The U.S., Iran has effectively destroyed most of the U.S. infrastructure has been built up over the last 30 years. What do? You can't go back into the Persian Gulf. Trump can't admit defeat. He's got to spin this somehow, but it's getting very, very difficult to spin it in any way that doesn't look like a defeat. He talked too much. They made too much of a thing about it. It should have kept it much quieter and less boastful. Then it could have been easier to spin out of it. But when Trump said, we will accept nothing but unconditional surrender, you've pretty much painted yourself in a corner politically. What do you do now? Oh, we've accepted anything but unconditional surrender in a couple of years because we're going to leave now because we don't have any missiles. That's one. Two, what happens when you don't have enough missiles and you can't defend Israel? Because the donor class is not going to be very happy if you leave, obviously speaking. And the donor class, people that have given $500 million to Trump have cleared out any issues for him to run, any opposition are going to demand, have demanded their chunk of meat, and it needs to be a bloody chunk of meat. Every single president in the U.S. has been for the last 40 years, has been under pressure from the Israelis to attack Iran. Nobody went and did it. Not even Trump went and did something this stupid. Again, it's very, very easy to start a war. How do you end a war? Let's have negotiations. We murdered the previous two negotiating parties. That doesn't work.
Unless you could get a new leader that's a bit more pragmatic, that gives Trump an off-ramp just for the sake of Iran, keeps the regime in power, but says to Trump, hey, we're going to give you X, Y, Z. That's symbolic, that he can go back to his voters, say, hey, Iran is going to give up their nuclear program, which, I'm not saying they were building it in the first place, and they're going to limit their ballistic missile program to never strike to the U.S., which they might have been planning it, but that will take years, and that's easy to concede on that. But they concede on these two things, which could be portrayed as a diplomatic win for Trump, and the Iranian regime gets to keep their power without further destroying Iran. So that could be a possibility if the Iranian regime gives them that off-ramp. Through maybe a mediator like Oman.
At this point, I don't think so. It could. I'm not going to say anything's possible. The politics is the art of the impossible, or the art of the possible. But I don't think, at least from what the sounds of it right now, is they're not in a mood. They're not in a mood. They're going to do it until they decide that they've done enough damage. And it's, will the U.S. be able to even come back into the Persian Gulf? I mean, frankly, for the U.S., it would be better not to come back in the Persian Gulf. Just trade with people. There's a reason George Washington said no entangling alliances. And there's one debate I was on, the George Bush Republicans are, well, we haven't listened to that in 100 years. It doesn't make you wise, though, by not listening to what Washington said in his goodbye address. And there was a reason. Trade with everybody, do not get into their alliances, do not get involved in their conflicts. U.S. has done absolutely the opposite of that. It cuts trade with everyone to try to punish them, and gets into all of these alliances and the various wars it has no reason to be in. If the U.S. was looking just for U.S. policy, it would never be in a war with Iran. A. B. No country. This is the difference between the civilization idea that BRICS and Russia in particular is carrying to the world versus the civilization idea that the U.S. is now carrying to the world. The U.S. had a civilizational idea of the American dream. It's dead. Everybody understands it's dead. Most young people can't afford to have kids. They can't afford a house. They can't afford anything. The American dream's dead. So what's the new civilizational idea they have? Hegemony. We'll come and take your resources. We'll kill your leaders. We'll bomb your country. Most countries don't sign on to that. What's the civilizational idea that BRICS and Russia, for example, carry? Conservatism, traditionalism, and let's trade and make money, and we're not going to bother you inside your country because you're going to live your way the way you want to live it. The people in Iran can decide what government they want or don't want. The people in China can decide what government they want, they don't want. The people in any other country can do the same. We're not going to impose our will on you because we have no right to do that. The U.S. has no right to do that, but the U.S. keeps doing it up to the point where it runs into a brick wall that it can't punch through. And right now, the U.S. has shown its Persian Gulf allies, and everybody else is watching, it cannot protect them. It is not willing to protect them. It physically cannot do it. Experts have been saying this, myself included, for years. The U.S. does not have a capacity to do this. I'm sure they heard it, but they didn't want to believe it. Now they've got no choice but to see this for themselves and believe it. U.S. cannot defend its allies. It's incapable of doing it. I'll give you one little example, and this is from 2002. It was 2002? Yeah, it was 2002. So I'm in charge of a deployment project, getting a unit ready to deploy. Exercise they were running, and we're getting ready to deploy to go to Iraq, 2003. And I'm in Fort Jackson, Florida. I'm a captain at this point. I'm walking on the military docks of a major who's in charge of those docks. And I'm standing there watching Marine M1A1s being loaded on a transport ship. And that transport ship has a Russian flag hanging off of it. And I look at the I look at that major and go, "What the hell, sir? What am I missing here?" It's like, "Oh, that's our little thing. We don't have a merchant marine. The last time we built any ships for the merchant marines in the 1950s, they're all been chopped up for steel. We hire civilian ships to carry U.S. equipment." And that's how the Army, the U.S. Military travels. It either forward deploys and just keeps them there for however long, or to deploy anywhere, it has to have somebody else's ship. This is 2002. It hasn't gotten better. It's only gotten worse. The U.S. military is a lot more of a paper tiger than anybody wants to realize. It's hampered by a lot of issues. 20% obesity rate is one of those issues. Women in combat arms is one of those issues because and this is not a military that's prepared to go fight across mountains and deserts against a determined foe on their homeland. I mean, look at what happened in Afghanistan. They spent 20 years fighting the Taliban to replace them with the Taliban. And the U.S. public is not going to get behind us. The only way Trump is going to have enough of a military is to call for a draft. At least 1.5 million men under arms additionally. And if he does that, he's going to have a revolution in his hands, flat out.
Yeah.
I mean, a country that has 40% obesity rate, has 30% just fat, has about less than 30% of the population that's within weight range, doesn't mean that they're physically fit, is not going to be able to pull up enough troops on a draft to fight a country on their home turf on the other side of the world that's in mountains that's just started to fight.
40% obesity. I didn't know that. I didn't know it's that high. 40% obesity rate in the U.S. is sad.
It's insane. I mean, we were discussing this as officers. We're discussing this at the end of the 90s. If we had to go fight somebody seriously and do the draft, who were we going to draft? And this was back when the obesity was about 20%.
But I mean, with technological advancements, people are becoming less and less important in times of war, especially with drones and AI.
Yeah, well, look at Ukraine, the Ukrainian conflict. People are just as important. Drones aren't going to win the war. Drones are an extra weapon. Drones have their limitations. Anti-drone warfare is growing very quickly. For example, we have used lasers, Chinese lasers, against Ukrainian drones. The Chinese laser systems are very effective. It takes 1 second on a plastic drone to cut it in half. On an airplane-sized drone, it takes 3 seconds to set it on fire. The counter is, it doesn't work during the rain. Well, drones don't fly in the rain. That's another thing. Drones are very limited by climatic conditions. They don't go in the fog. They don't go in the rain. They don't go in heavy snow. They don't go in strong winds. They don't fly. They're not that stable. So in the end, until an infantryman puts a flag somewhere on a piece of land, that land isn't theirs. In the end, it still comes down to the infantryman with an assault rifle, grenades, clearing out whatever objective or holding whatever objective that you have. That's how it's been, and that's how it's continuing to be. Unless you got robots that can come in there, and they're still going to have issues.
People are still men are still very important now. I'm saying it's becoming less and less important. So probably in 20 years' time, warfare will be very different. But till then, I wanted to quickly add one quick comment on something you said, Stanislav. You talked about how Russian values versus American values. I think I look at it differently. I think we live in a world where the bullies could do whatever they want. We're seeing that with what's happening now with the US and Iran. We're seeing that with Ukraine and Russia. I know, I'm also blame NATO to an extent, but I think Russia did invade Ukraine. Different discussion. I know it's a different discussion. We've gone for a while.
That by the way, was Article 51, right to defend. 8 years Ukraine was shelling. My relatives lived there. And you know what the people in the east of Ukraine were asking for? They had insane demands. They were asking for federalization. They wanted the right to elect their governors. They had a right to have a say in where their taxes was. Because Ukraine is a mafia state, feudalistic state. They put oligarchs over provinces, and it's their feeding grounds. They don't invest in these provinces that they rule as governors. They collect money, they give their cut to Kyiv and who is ever in power in Kyiv, and the rest goes into their own pockets. And that's how Kyiv has been run for the last 30 years. This is a country that in 1991 left the Soviet Union debt-free because Russia took all the debt and paid all the debt off, had an industrial and scientific base the size of France's. In 2021, it was lower than Uganda. In fact, the president of Uganda was very upset when they said, Ukraine's like Uganda. It's like, no, we live much better than these people. Ukraine was robbed. I've been to Ukraine plenty of times. I have relatives in Ukraine. I'm talking about on the other side of the border, too. I as a supply chain director, I was in a lot of these manufacturing facilities in Ukraine back in 2010, back in 2009, trying to find additional suppliers. And I left because it was pointless in doing business with these people. They were all looking for the one big score and get the hell out of Ukraine. The facilities were all in horrible condition. They weren't investing in anything. They're sucking everything out of there. Ukraine is a failed state, is the most corrupt country in the world, run by an illegal dictator, an illegal parliament.
I still think like that argument, making it for Ukraine or making it for Iran, I think it should not justify what the US did in Iran, should not justify what Russia did in Ukraine. Not putting all the blame on Russia, but I think they crossed the line. Just one last comment on that, since you're talking about Ukraine. Is there a possibility where Iran changes the geopolitical alliances so much so that Europe, obviously struggling because of energy prices, that forces Europe to concede more on the negotiating table between Zelensky and Putin, between Russia and Ukraine? Same for Trump. And Iran may be the reason that Europe and even the US improve relations with Putin, and we might see the end of the war in Ukraine?
Look, I don't know what level of actual trust is between Vladimir Vladimirovich and Donald Trump. But most of the Russian, a lot of the Russian elites, they don't see anything to trust. These talks have gone into a dead end. I go down to the front lines often enough. I speak with, it's not just with some generals that I know or colonels. I speak with the regular soldiers too. And I'll tell you this, off the Russian military, of course, everyone wants peace. What they all fear is some kind of a deal. They want peace, as in capitulation of Kyiv. And this is from the line infantry. This is from the line soldiers. They've invested too much time. They've lost too many friends. They've lost too much of their own lives in this to go into any kind of deal. We've seen what deals with Kyiv end with. Constant terrorism, constant attacks, and eventually another war. So the point is, it's rather we finish this now so our kids don't have to fight. And this is how it's going to be. The Russian military at this point, there's nothing to deal with. Ukraine's collapsing internally. They're eating each other up on the political side. Zelensky's, quote, wants elections when he doesn't want elections because he's going to control the elections. You know, it's a dictatorship where the dictator wins, 95% backing. It's an illegal. The problem in Ukraine, quite simply, Zelensky's never planning to die of old age in Ukraine. Nobody around him is planning on dying of old age in Ukraine. Ukraine is a feeding ground for them and nothing more. Zelensky's mother and father live in Ashkelon, if I remember correctly, in a mansion that he bought him. His wife and kids are in London. He's the 9th largest landowner in America through fund companies. Yermolov, who ran off to the U.S., his whole family and himself had U.S. citizenship in 2016. When the negotiating team came, there was 2 American teams. There was Witkoff and his guys, and then the Ukrainians all had American citizenship. These people are not going to be around to rebuild Ukraine that they've helped destroy. They're going to leave the moment they can't make any more money. And as long as there's living Ukrainians that can be sold off onto the battlefield, they're making money. These are parasites. They're going to drain Ukraine to its death. It already is, basically. And they don't give a damn about those people. They're not going to die of old age. The kids are not going to grow up in Ukraine. Ukraine is just a host for these parasites. They're sucking it dry. And the Ukrainian people, no matter what their nationality, no matter what who they are nothing but material to be sold at the maximum price. We've seen this, and we will continue to see it. There's not going to be any negotiated peace. It's just not going to happen. It's who you're going to negotiate with.
We need to try to get you more optimistic, Stanislav. We need to get you more optimistic.
If you want to understand what the people are like that, fly to Russia. I will take you down to the front lines.
I was there. I was invited to the front lines. I went there to interview Lavrov, and I was in Ukraine before it as well. Both invited me to the front lines. It deemed too risky.
We can go closer than just the front lines. You can talk to the people, the civilians. Look, I was just 2 months ago. I was in Avdiivka. And while we were there, we had drones flying overhead. They have FPV drones coming in every day. We had an air battle over our heads. Another drone was shut down not too far from us. There are civilians there. Counted 6 fully repaired buildings, another 8 that were under repair. Civilian buildings, big residency buildings. New government building that was opened, office. Another building that was 100 meters long, 6 meters tall, 6 stories high, that was built from scratch. And these are civilian workers that, of course, they get paid for this, but they're working basically in the near rear pseudo combat zone, and they're building the city back up. Stores are opening up. This is what Russians are. You can't scare Russians. Okay, so there's drones overhead, and I might get killed, but I have a job to do, and that's the Russian mentality.
Honestly, Russians, both you Russians and Ukrainians have been some of the most courageous people, even Ukrainians.
Ukrainians are Russians, historically speaking. But I will tell you, simply put, the difference in mentality, between Americans and Russians is this simple saying. In America, there's a saying, do or die. The Russian saying is die but do. Even if you're going to die, you better well damn finish your damn mission. That's the Russian mentality. I mean, that is absolutely the Russian mentality. It doesn't matter the sacrifice, you're going to finish the mission that you've got ahead of you. That's it. That is the Russian mentality. And that's what you're fighting against. And believe you me, right now, the Shia in Iran have exactly the same mentality. And they're not going to stop because they have no reason to stop. They're winning. I mean, in the long term, they're winning. So that's enough note.
Great discussion. I really enjoyed it. It's our first discussion, but I'd love to have another one again.
Okay.
Your knowledge, military experience and knowledge has been really interesting to listen to. So thank you.
Thank you.